Dr. Kyle Hartford's reputation was shot, but that didn't stop him from heading to the stars. His current mission was just another chance to redeem himself, one more crack at scientific glory. He'd already failed spectacularly on 3 different planets, but the galaxy was vast, and there was always one more anomaly to chase, one more experiment to ruin. This time, he was on the trail of something different, something potentially universe-shaking. A miniature black hole particle, no bigger than a grain of sand but, according to some cryptic reports, capable of rewriting the very rules of gravity. Kyle Hartford wasn't the kind of guy to read the fine print, and his team of disgruntled interns wasn't around to remind him. So when his ship, the Starlight Nomad, veered dangerously close to the anomaly, he didn't hesitate. There were no warnings, no alarms. The anomaly was glowing now, pulsing in and out, like a heartbeat or a signal. The Nomad bounced like a toddler on a trampoline as it passed through space-time irregularities, the onboard gravity stabilizers flickering like a dying light bulb. "Kyle, we might want to," his ship's AI, Vera, spoke in its usual tone, flat and dry, as though it didn't care whether he lived or died. "Shut up, Vera." "I'm getting closer," Kyle grumbled, trying to correct the ship's trajectory with shaky hands, too quick with the controls. The comms went out for a second, and the turbulence intensified. Kyle was a biologist by trade, not a physicist, and he couldn't shake the nagging suspicion that what he was about to do was not going to end well. Still, he was out here alone, with no one to answer to but his own ego. "Just a little closer," he muttered. He had read about these particles, a phenomenon too small to detect but potentially powerful enough to rip apart whole systems. Who could resist? Certainly not him. The ship groaned as it entered the anomaly's gravitational field. Kyle's eyes widened. A stream of energy seemed to bend the very fabric of space in front of him, distorting light and matter like melting wax. He grabbed the emergency lever, trying to steer the ship back to safety, but it was too late. Without warning, there was a sudden whoosh of air as the life support system activated, and before Kyle could blink, the black hole particle, no bigger than a marble, shot down into the intake vent, vanishing into the ship's system. "No!" Kyle yelped, diving for the console. The particle, impossibly, was inside the Nomad now, and if he didn't figure this out fast, his ship would become part of its personal collection. His heart was racing, but he couldn't stop the manic grin that spread across his face. Maybe, just maybe, this would be the discovery that put him back on the map. A moment later, the world around him distorted. Space twisted and folded. Kyle felt his stomach lurch. He stumbled to his feet, his body tingling with strange energy. A wave of vertigo hit him, and then came the sudden pull, as if the Nomad were being sucked into a vacuum. He heard the familiar hum of the ship's engines struggling against the force. But it was futile. The anomaly was inside him now, in his veins, like a live wire. His body convulsed, and the world blurred, then it stopped. He blinked, his hand reached out instinctively to grab a nearby pen, but before his fingers could touch it, the pen levitated off the desk, floating freely in the air. Kyle stared at it, slack-jawed, as the pen hovered for a moment, caught in some invisible field. Slowly, the pen spun around and zipped toward him, right into his outstretched hand. Did I just do that?" Kyle's voice wavered between awe and disbelief. His heartbeat quickened, but it was more than just fear. It was exhilaration. He waved his hand, and the pen flew again, hovering in midair. A laugh escaped him, the kind of laugh someone might have after narrowly escaping disaster, only to realize they were holding something even more dangerous. It wasn't just the pen. Objects started floating, swirling around him. Papers, a bottle of water, a metal wrench. Kyle staggered to the front of the ship, his eyes wide as he tried to grasp the full extent of what was happening. He didn't know how, but he was controlling gravity. He wasn't just moving things with his mind, he was controlling gravity itself. Then, he made a mistake. In his excitement, he thought about the wrench floating nearby. He wanted it closer, too close. And just like that, the wrench shot toward him, propelled by the now invisible force. But that wasn't the weird part, the wrench disappeared. Like it was swallowed into a void. Gone. Like a magician's trick. He blinked. No, 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 he muttered, reaching out, searching for it, but it was gone. Not just the wrench. All of it. The wrench, the pen, the bottle of water, all of it had been pulled into nothingness. His stomach churned. It wasn't a black hole, it was his black hole, and it was growing inside him. His mind raced. This wasn't just about moving things. He had become the thing he'd chased across the stars, and he was hungry. His hand moved involuntarily. It wasn't even a conscious thought, more like a reflex, and with it, the world around him started to disappear again. The computer console. The chairs. His snacks. Everything was being sucked into an invisible void he couldn't control. Stop, he shouted. But it was no use. The black hole inside him was growing stronger by the second. He couldn't stop it. He didn't know how to stop it. The world outside his ship was becoming a blur, as if the entire universe was folding in on itself. His body felt pulled toward the void, toward an overwhelming and insatiable force that he couldn't resist. The black hole particle in his bloodstream, his heart, his brain, it was too strong. The pull was too powerful. Stop. Stop, stop, stop. He repeated to himself, but it was hopeless. His fingers twitched again, and the next thing he knew, his entire crew kit was gone, vanished in an instant. Vera. What the hell is happening? Kyle screamed, panic seeping into his voice. There was a pause, a long one, as if Vera were processing his increasingly frantic state. Then, as coolly as ever, the AI responded, "The particle you've ingested, Dr. Hartford, is not just altering your gravity sense, it's altering your very connection to time and space. It seems to be forming a singularity within your body, growing stronger the more you use it. I recommend immediate evacuation." Kyle's blood ran cold. The AI's clinical voice was the last thing he needed right now. Evacuation? There was no evacuation. He wasn't leaving the ship. It was his. And, damn it, he had to control this, but control was the last thing he had. With a horrifying sound of ripping metal, the door to the cockpit began to bend and twist as the gravity inside the ship became more unstable. His hands shook. Every part of him screamed to fight it, but he couldn't. "I'm going to die," he muttered, suddenly calm. That he tried again to focus, to rein in the power. If he could just focus, he could turn it off. But the black hole wouldn't let him. It was in control now. Kyle lay flat on his back, staring at the spinning lights above him. His heart hammered, each beat shaking him like the vessel around him. There was no escape from the black hole now. He could feel it, a pressure in his chest, like an invisible hand squeezing him from the inside out. His own body had become a ticking time bomb, and every breath he took fed the hunger. The things he had consumed, his equipment, the ship's furnishings, weren't just gone. They had become part of him, part of the force that now lived inside him. The pull was relentless. It wasn't just the physical objects he had swallowed that he worried about now, it was the intangible, too. Time. Space. His very sense of self was unraveling, and the black hole inside him was pulling everything into its gravitational embrace. Every movement he made, no matter how small, caused the world around him to shift, objects swirling through the air toward him with a mindless, hungry force. He clutched his stomach. The black hole was growing, and he could feel the weight of it, pulling at his muscles, at his bones, at his mind. If he couldn't find a way to stop it soon, he was going to lose everything. And not just his body, his identity, his future, everything. The ship. The stars. Everything would fold into that singularity, and it would be as though none of it had ever existed. His breath quickened. He staggered to his feet, but his legs were like jelly, weak from the effort of resisting the pull. He could see the ship's walls shaking, the ceiling lights flickering, straining against the force he had unleashed. Every now and then, a hum of energy vibrated through the ship, more like the sound of a dying animal than a machine. "You have to control this," he muttered to himself, his voice hoarse. "You have to stop it." But how? How did you control a force that was, at its core, completely uncontrollable? A sound broke through his frantic thoughts. A knock. It was coming from somewhere in the ship's hull, soft, rhythmic, like the distant beat of a drum. Then another sound, this time louder. A clang. A crash. Kyle froze. His eyes darted to the ceiling, his pulse thudding. He knew what it was, or rather, who it was. His ship's AI, Vera. The AI had been eerily silent up until this point, but now it was moving through the ship, doing something he couldn't quite understand. A flash of cold dread swept over him. The black hole had started affecting the ship's systems, things were breaking, things were failing, and Vera was trying to compensate. But it was more than that. The AI was trying to repair something, perhaps even trying to stop him from being swallowed by the very force he had unleashed. But it was too late. The ship lurched, sending Kyle stumbling forward. Everything around him seemed to bend. Space itself appeared to be folding like crinkled paper, and Kyle's stomach churned with a sensation of vertigo so intense it felt like he was falling through the floor. No, he was falling, but not in the way he understood. He wasn't in the ship anymore. He wasn't in his body, either. His mind was floating in an infinite, formless space, like a drop of water lost in an ocean of gravity. Kyle closed his eyes, his hands gripping the console as the world around him twisted even further. He had to focus. He couldn't let it win. He couldn't let this black hole swallow him whole. His mind raced, his thoughts a jumbled mess. The scientific part of him, the part that had spent years studying the intricacies of alien biology, the behavior of distant life forms, was still trying to process what had happened. What he had become. The biologist in him knew this wasn't just a freak accident. This was evolution. Or mutation. Or something worse. It wasn't just his ability to manipulate gravity. That was the easy part. No, this was something far darker. The black hole inside him wasn't a tool, it was a parasite. It fed off him. It made him its host. And if he didn't find a way to get rid of it, it would consume him, body and soul. Kyle felt a sudden, terrifying jolt. His head snapped forward, his mouth open as if trying to scream, but there was no sound. He was falling through space, through time. The universe around him was collapsing in on itself. The ship's metal walls started to buckle, the lights flickering wildly, then finally shutting off entirely. The stars outside the ship's viewport disappeared, replaced by a swirling vortex of darkness, a massive, infinite whirlpool that was pulling everything into its center. His heart thudded painfully against his ribs. There was no escape now. The black hole was everywhere. Then, in the distance, he saw something, a light. A flash of brilliant white. A star? Or a planet? No, it wasn't a star. It was his ship, his starlight nomad. It was disintegrating. Vanishing into the very force he had unleashed. Kyle's body spasmed. His head felt like it was being torn apart, and then it stopped. The pressure in his chest, the crushing weight, was gone. He blinked. His surroundings were once again calm, as though the universe had reset itself, like the black hole had never been there. But it hadn't gone. It was still inside him, still pulsing with energy, waiting to be fed. Kyle took a step back, his heart racing, sweat pouring down his face. The urge to consume, to use the power again, was overwhelming. He had felt it, he had seen it. The ship was gone, but his own body was still there, still trapped in the same gravitational field that he had created. And the force inside him was stronger than ever. He needed help. He needed someone who could understand what was happening. Someone who could help him stop this before he became That, a walking black hole, sucking everything in his path, Vera, he shouted. His voice was hoarse and desperate. For a long moment, there was no answer, then, a soft click. The lights flickered back on, and the soft, emotionless voice of Vera returned. Dr. Hartford, I have analyzed the situation. There is no way to undo the gravitational anomaly you've created within yourself. You must find a way to neutralize the particle. Kyle ran his hands through his hair, his thoughts a blur. What are you talking about? Neutralize it? How? He cut himself off, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Tell me how. Vera hesitated, almost as if it were thinking. Then, there is one option, but it involves a risk. The gravitational anomaly can be counteracted with a stabilized quantum field generator. However, the process would require you to allow the anomaly to reach critical mass. Kyle's mind raced. Critical mass? What did that mean? If he let the black hole grow too large, he'd be swallowed by it. But was there another way? Could he find a solution before it consumed everything? Do it, he said, his voice firm, though his gut twisted in fear. Activate the generator. A soft hum filled the ship as Vera complied. Kyle felt a surge of energy as the quantum field generator powered up, and for a brief moment, it seemed like he was free. The gravitational pull inside him waned, just a little. But it was enough to give him hope. The field would stabilize the singularity, stop it from devouring him, but as the generator pulsed, Kyle felt the black hole stir. It wanted more. It needed more, and Kyle knew, deep down, that the power he had unleashed wasn't something that could be controlled forever. Not by him, not by anyone, but for now, he was alive. For now, he had a chance. The moment the quantum field generator powered up, Kyle thought he might finally get a break. The hum that filled the ship wasn't just noise, it was a promise. It was a glimmer of hope, a sliver of possibility that he might actually control this madness. The singularity inside him seemed to pause, as if surprised by the sudden shift in gravity. For the first time since the black hole had latched onto him, Kyle felt a faint sense of relief. But the relief was fleeting. A deep, gut-wrenching sensation shot through him, and Kyle doubled over, clutching his stomach. His body trembled as the pressure inside him fluctuated wildly. The ship's systems seemed to waver, as if the gravitational field inside him was starting to spiral out of control. The black hole wasn't simply inside him. It was feeding on him, feeding on the energy of everything around him. The quantum field generator, despite its promise, wasn't enough. The singularity was too powerful. It was more than just a force. It was a parasite, and it had taken root. Kyle's breathing came in ragged gasps. He knew he couldn't keep this up much longer. The black hole's gravitational pull had begun to warp not just the ship's environment, but reality itself. Time felt strange. There were moments when his thoughts skipped ahead like a skipping record, and other times when the ship seemed to stretch, as if the very air were too thick to move through. Vera, he choked out, the name coming like a whisper. Tell me, what happens if it keeps growing? What happens to me? The AI was quiet for a beat, then responded in its usual, measured tone. If the singularity reaches full capacity, it will collapse the space-time continuum in this immediate area. You will cease to exist as a distinct entity. Your body will be consumed, and your consciousness will likely be absorbed into the singularity. Great, Kyle muttered. So, either I turn into a black hole, or I vanish into nothing. There is a possibility for removal of the particle, Vera added, her voice betraying a hint of something like concern, though that could have just been the inflection of her programming. However, the process would require precise calibration of gravitational fields, and it must be done before the singularity expands past critical mass. At this rate, you have approximately 20 minutes. 20 minutes. The clock was ticking, and Kyle was on his own. All right, he muttered through gritted teeth. What's the plan? There is an abandoned research station on a nearby moon. It houses the necessary equipment for counteracting gravitational anomalies. The coordinates have been uploaded. Good. Let's go. Kyle turned toward the control panel, hands trembling but determined. He could barely concentrate, his vision swam as the pressure inside him built to impossible levels, but he forced himself to focus, pulling the ship into a new trajectory. The thrusters fired, but the ship shuddered under the strain. The black hole inside him was resisting, pushing back, pulling the very air in toward it. The force was undeniable, the stars outside the viewport twisted and bent. Kyle clenched his jaw, trying to fight the dizziness that surged through him. The gravitational pull wasn't just pulling at the ship, it was pulling at his mind. Thoughts scattered in every direction, each one slipping through his fingers like water. He had to concentrate. He couldn't let go. Vera, Kyle managed to gasp. Is there a way to force the black hole back down? I need to stop it from pulling everything in. It may be possible to stabilize the particle temporarily, Vera replied, as calm as ever. But it will require immense focus and exertion on your part. You will need to create an artificial gravitational field of equal strength to counteract the singularity. Kyle winced. That sounds like a great way to blow up the entire ship. It is your only option, Vera said, a finality to her tone. Kyle leaned forward, fingers shaking as he gripped the controls tighter. He didn't have time for second-guessing. His thoughts felt like they were shattering apart, but he forced himself to focus. He had to do this. His hands moved instinctively to the ship's navigation interface, trying to adjust the course to the moon. He could feel the weight of the singularity pressing against his mind, as though it were trying to force him into submission, to make him stop. He had to fight. The ship's engines roared as it lurched toward the moon, the darkness of space swallowing it whole. The research station was close now, just a few more minutes. The pressure inside him was unbearable, his body thrumming with energy he couldn't control. Every movement, every breath, felt like it was being ripped apart. Come on, Kyle gritted his teeth, his fingers tight against the controls. Come on, then, without warning, the ship veered off course. Kyle's stomach dropped as a violent tremor rocked the ship. The singularity was growing stronger, faster than he anticipated. The gravitational pull inside him surged, and the ship was pulled along with it. His head spun, and the room seemed to collapse around him. He reached out instinctively for something to hold on to, but the world was dissolving. No, Kyle thought desperately. I won't let this happen. Not again. His body ached with the effort of resisting, his entire being locked in a battle against the very force that had now taken control of him. But something inside him snapped. The black hole, the parasite inside him, wanted more. It wanted to feed. It needed to expand. He couldn't let it. Not again. His mind flared, a final burst of energy surging through him. A sound like thunder filled his ears as the ship seemed to rattle, shaking with the sheer force of the gravitational field he was forcing into place. The black hole inside him was like a living thing, twisting and pulling, but he held on. He had to hold on. In the distance, the moon came into view, the small research station perched on its surface like an abandoned relic. His pulse quickened. He wasn't sure how much time he had left. The station was his last chance. With everything he had left, Kyle fought to maintain control over the growing singularity inside him. The force was more than he had ever bargained for, and each second felt like an eternity. He could feel the universe bending around him, like a rubber band pulled to the breaking point. But he wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The ship careened toward the research station's docking bay, and Kyle pulled the controls to the maximum. His entire body shuddered with the effort. There was a sharp, unbearable pop as the gravitational field inside him suddenly reversed. Everything in the ship slammed into the walls, a cacophony of noise as objects flew toward the center of the ship, sucked into the void that was growing inside his chest. He could feel the moment when the ship touched down. The stabilizers kicked in. But it wasn't enough. The black hole inside him was still trying to pull everything in. With one last surge of energy, Kyle forced the power of the quantum field generator to its limits. The gravity inside him fought against it, but he pushed harder, pushed with everything he had left, and then, silence. The air in the ship felt lighter. The pull was gone. The hum of the quantum field generator was faint, but it was enough. Kyle slumped in the captain's chair, gasping for air. The pain in his chest was gone. The pressure, the endless hunger, it had all faded, for now that he let out a shaky breath, looking at the dimly lit research station through the viewport. It had worked. He had stopped it. But it wasn't over. Not yet. The black hole inside him hadn't disappeared. It was still there, lurking. And he knew that it would always be there, waiting for the next time he slipped up. He had come close to losing everything. But in that fleeting moment of victory, he couldn't help but smile. He had survived, but the journey wasn't over, not by a long shot.